This story is fiction set in the 1870s. The Violet Letter. Chapter 1. Charlie Atherton was not the sort of man to draw attention. Born to a respectable but unremarkable middle-class family in Kent, he lived by the quiet clockwork of Victorian expectation. At 23, he worked as a clerk in a solicitor's office, wore modest suits, and read Byron by gaslight when the house fell quiet. But Charlie had a secret. It began on a rain-soaked Tuesday when he was called to deliver documents to the home of Sir Reginald Harrowmere, a reclusive aristocrat known more for his eccentricities than his titles. The estate was draped in silence, its ivy-covered walls casting shadows over the damp gravel drive. That was when he met her, Eloan Harrowmere, the daughter of the house. She had hair the color of ravens and heterochromic eyes like storm and churned seas. Not beautiful in the usual sense, but haunting. Eloan was unlike anyone Charlie had ever met. She laughed when others whispered, read poetry that was forbidden in polite company, and asked questions that made Charlie's heart pound. Not out of romance, but fear that the world he knew might unravel. Their meetings became frequent, first by chance, then by design. She would leave pressed violets in books he delivered. Once, a letter. Do you believe in cages, Charlie? I think we were born in one. It was love, wild and blooming. But there was something strange about Eloan. She would vanish for days without explanation. Once, Charlie saw bruises on her wrist. When he asked, she only smiled and said, even birds with wings can be chained. Then came the violet letter, sealed with wax, hidden behind a loose brick at the rear garden wall. It simply read, if I disappear, do not look for me. But if you must, follow the raven to the ruins by the sea. The next day, Eloan was gone. Sir Reginald claimed she'd been sent abroad for her health. But Charlie didn't believe him. Rumors surfaced in town of a woman's scream echoing from the estate at night, of a carriage leaving under moonlight with no driver in sight. Against all sense and fear, Charlie set off for the coast, to a crumbling chapel long swallowed by sea winds and forgotten prayers. There, in the stone-cold ruin, he would uncover the truth of Eloan's past, of her entrapment, and of the dark bargain made to silence her forever. But he would also discover something else. Eloan's idea of freedom was not the same as his. And love, Charlie would learn, is not always a chain to be broken, but sometimes a cage willingly entered. Chapter 2. The train to Whitcliffe rattled like a dying thing, iron shrieking against the tracks as gray countryside blurred past the window. Charlie sat alone in his compartment, the letter from Eloan clutched tightly in his gloved hand. Her neat cursive had begun to smudge with the moisture of his palm, but he couldn't let it go. He'd read it again and again since her disappearance. If I disappear, do not look for me. But if you must, follow the raven to the ruins by the sea. The ruins she spoke of could only be the old chapel of St. Lucian, long abandoned, perched like a forgotten sentinel above the cliffs of Whitcliffe. It was where smugglers once met and where local children dared each other to go at night. Charlie had visited it once as a boy and remembered the cold breath of the wind that whistled through broken stone. Why would Eloan go there? The moment the train hissed into the station, Charlie stepped into the sea air. Whitcliffe was as he remembered. Foggy, salt-stained, and suspicious of strangers. He checked into a small inn near the shore. The innkeeper, a short man with sunken eyes, eyed him warily. You look like a man chasing ghosts, he said. Best be careful. Things vanish out here, and the sea doesn't return what it takes. Charlie tried to sleep that night but failed. His dreams were filled with ravens and laughter that turned to screams. At first light, he took the cliff path toward the ruins, his boots crunching on frost-hardened grass. As the chapel came into view, its silhouette bleak against the rising sun, Charlie saw something flutter on the jagged window, a scrap of violet cloth, like a petal clinging to stone. His heart pounded. He entered through the broken archway. The chapel was hollowed by time, moss on stone, the altar long collapsed, a skeletal tree growing through the floor. And there on the stone steps was another letter sealed with violet wax. Charlie broke the seal with trembling hands. You found me, Charlie. Or at least the part of me that remained free. I left this piece behind because I needed you to know. I never wanted saving. Not truly. I loved you, yes, but my love was born in a prison. And I needed to see if it could live outside of it. You must leave now. There are men who watch this place. They do not forgive curiosity. A sudden crack echoed through the ruins. Charlie spun around. A figure stood at the doorway, dressed in dark, travel-worn clothing, his face shadowed by the low light. The man stepped forward, revealing a long scar across his cheek and eyes that glinted like wet iron. "You're Charlie Atherton," he said flatly. "Miss Harrowmere said you might come. She also said not to let you die." Charlie backed away. "Where is she? Where's Eloan?" "She's safe," the man said. "But only because she made a choice. One you don't get to unmake." Before Charlie could respond, the man tossed him a worn leather satchel. "This is hers. She said you'd understand." Inside was a small diary, pressed violets between the pages, and a photograph of them together. Taken on the estate grounds the summer before, smiling under a blooming lilac tree. On the back, written in her handwriting, "For the days when I still believed in love with no cost." Charlie dropped to his knees, the weight of the moment hollowing him out. She was alive, but she had chosen to vanish, to be free, to become something beyond what the world, or even he, could allow her to be. And perhaps that was the truest heartbreak. Not that he had lost her, but that she had needed to lose him to survive. Chapter 3. Charlie left Wycliffe that afternoon. No longer chasing a ghost, but walking away from a love that had changed him. Back in Kent, he returned to his ordinary life. The solicitor's office, the evening readings, the quiet dinners. But he was not the same man. He began to write about Eloan, about love, about cages and the illusion of freedom. His words slowly gained attention. A column in a journal, a serialized story, then a novel. Years passed. He never saw Eloan again. But sometimes when the wind shifted just right, he swore he could smell salt and violets. And once, just once, he received a letter in violet wax and signed, "You were the only real thing in that house, Charlie. I hope you found the world you were meant for. I found mine." It had been 5 years since Charlie Atherton last heard Eloan's name spoken aloud. In that time, he had become something of a quiet literary figure. Not quite famous, but spoken of in thoughtful corners of drawing rooms and coffee houses. His first book, The Violet Letter, was praised for its aching realism and melancholy beauty. Readers speculated on its origins, but Charlie never spoke of Eloan publicly. To him, she was both too sacred and too unfinished. Now 30 and living in London, Charlie ran a modest bookshop tucked into a narrow alley off Highgate Hill. The shop had no name, only a brass bell over the door and the scent of old paper and pipe smoke lingering in the air. Locals loved it, travelers stumbled upon it, and he loved the quiet rhythm of its days. It was a particularly cold November morning when she entered. She wore a long navy cloak, her gloved hands dusted with frost. Her hood was drawn, and only a few wisps of deep black hair slipped out beneath it. She browsed silently, her fingers pausing on volumes of poetry, Shelley, Keats, Rossetti. Charlie, shelving books in the back, watched her from the corner of his eye. Something about her movements struck a distant chord. A faint memory, like a tune half remembered. When she reached the front desk, she placed 3 books down without a word. As Charlie looked up, their eyes met. One gray, one blue. He froze. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice catching. She said nothing for a moment, then gave the faintest smile. "I'd like these if you don't mind." Her voice was different, more measured, older, but unmistakable. "Eloan," he breathed. She tilted her head. "Is that what you remember me as?" His chest tightened. "You're alive." She nodded. "You knew that." He swallowed. "I did. But knowing isn't the same as seeing." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a letter, sealed with the same violet wax he remembered. "This isn't a beginning," she said softly, "but it might be a middle." He took the letter, his hand shaking. "You should read it after I leave." "Eloan, why now?" She glanced around the quiet shop, her eyes taking in the worn shelves, the scattered chairs, the little cat asleep on the counter. "Because I wanted to see what became of the boy who once tried to save a ghost," she said. "And because I needed to know if you were still trapped in the same story." Before he could speak again, she turned and left, the brass bell above the door ringing like the final chime of a dream. Charlie stood there for a long time. Then he opened the letter. "Dearest Charlie, I have seen the world through many names. Eloan Harrowmere was only one of them. After I left, I followed the tide of my own making, through foreign cities, through shadows and storms, through laughter that was sometimes real. I was hunted for a while, protected for a time, forgotten by many, but never by you. You once told me that love was a promise. I never gave you mine, but you carried yours as though it were enough for both of us. This is not a plea, nor an apology. It is only a thank you. You gave me the courage to vanish. And because of that, I lived. We are not meant to end where we began, Charlie. But sometimes, when the world is quiet, I still remember the boy who held a violet like a vow. Be free, as I was. Always. E. Chapter 4. That night, Charlie did not sleep. He walked the streets of London, passing gaslights and hansom cabs, letting the city murmur its secrets to him. In his pocket, the letter felt like a heart he hadn't realized was still beating. She was never his to keep, but perhaps she had never truly left him either. And now, years after her departure, he understood the shape of their story. Not a tragedy, not a romance, but a kind of liberation for them both. Charlie returned to the shop by dawn and began to write again. Not a sequel, but a new beginning. Not about Eloan, but about a man who learns to live not for the past, nor even for love, but for himself. And though she never returned, not to the shop, not to his life, every November, a violet sealed in wax would appear on the doorstep. No note, no sender, just a single bloom, preserved. And that was enough. A year passed after that encounter. Charlie Atherton had almost finished his second novel, Ashes Beneath Ivy. A story of betrayal and forgiveness in a crumbling manor house. His writing had matured. It carried an edge now, something raw and haunted. His publisher said he wrote like a man who'd loved and lost twice. Charlie never corrected them. Life was quiet, predictable. He kept the shop, drank Darjeeling at dawn, and walked the same fog-lined paths each week. But it changed one gray afternoon in March. The bell above the door rang. Charlie, unpacking a crate of first editions, barely looked up until he saw the man's eyes. Piercing and strangely familiar, though not in the way that bred comfort. "Mr. Atherton?" the man asked. Charlie nodded, wary. "I'm Reverend Aldrich Vale. I come from Morley Abbey." Charlie furrowed his brow. "I don't know the name." "You wouldn't. Few do." The man stepped closer. "But she did." Charlie stiffened. "Who?" The Reverend placed a small, leather-bound book on the counter. Charlie's breath caught. It was the Violet Letter, but not a published edition. A handwritten copy, delicate and neat and inscribed with Eloan's initials in faded ink. "I believe she left this behind," the Reverend said quietly. "I think you should come see." Chapter 5. Morley Abbey was not a religious site, not anymore. Nestled between the Northumberland hills, it had been turned into a sanatorium decades ago for people deemed sensitive or unstable, terms Charlie loathed. He was reluctant to go. But something gnawed at him, some pull that twisted beneath the ribs. So he went. It was colder than London and quieter, almost too quiet. The grounds were choked with ivy and silence. Inside, the abbey smelled of damp stone, lavender, and ink. "This way," Reverend Vale said. They passed dim halls and closed doors. At last, they reached a small library. The Reverend opened a drawer and handed Charlie a box. Inside were letters. Dozens. All in Eloan's script. "I don't understand," Charlie whispered. "She lived here," said the Reverend. "Under a different name. She came 6 years ago. Told us she was fleeing persecution. Never said from whom." Charlie swallowed. "She said she traveled the world. She didn't leave these walls. Not once." The world tilted. Reverend Vale took a deep breath. "Mr. Atherton, the letter you received last year. The one she delivered personally." Charlie nodded. "She never left this place. And she died 2 weeks before that date." Charlie stared at him. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Vale handed him one more item, a sketch. Drawn in charcoal. It showed Eloan older, worn, eyes haunted. And behind her, faint but unmistakable, was the seal of the violet wax pressed into the margin. "She believed someone watched over her," Vale murmured. "She spoke often of a boy with a violet heart. Said he would always find the truth when the world became quiet." Chapter 6. Back in London, Charlie didn't sleep. He read the letters. They were pieces of her, scattered like broken mirrors, pages filled with questions, guilt, beauty, and warnings. Eloan feared something. Not a person. An idea. A force she called the Gilded Eye. Over and over, she referenced it. "The eye watches those who see too much. The eye keeps balance between truth and invention. The eye knows when a lie becomes dangerous." And in the final letter, dated only days before her death, she wrote, "I sent him a letter, but I don't think it will ever reach him, not unless the eye allows it. But if it does, tell him. What you believe is not the whole story. The girl you loved, she was only the doorway. The truth is still behind it. And the key is in the silence. Charlie sat back, eyes burning. Eloane hadn't just vanished. She had hidden. Not just from people, but from something bigger. Something watching. And then he remembered something. The violet-sealed letter that had appeared on his doorstep that year, how it hadn't been delivered by hand. He'd assumed she placed it there, but the truth was he'd never seen who left it. And each year, since then, one had appeared. He checked his desk drawer. There it was. This year's letter. Unopened. His hands trembled as he broke the seal. Inside was no letter. Only a key. And a small slip of paper. Morlea's West Wing. Behind the false shelf. The truth waits in ink and ash. The train to Morley trembled across the hills like a silver thread through the fabric of mist. Charlie sat still, the weight of the key in his coat pocket anchoring him to a truth he hadn't yet uncovered. The violet-sealed note had no explanation. Only instructions. Morlea's West Wing. Behind the false shelf. The truth waits in ink and ash. Reverend Vale had not replied to any of Charlie's letters since his last visit. The number he had given disconnected a week ago. When Charlie arrived, Morley Abbey looked different, not in structure, but in atmosphere. The silence no longer felt peaceful. It was heavy now, intrusive. Even the ivy seemed to lean in, listening. The West Wing had been sealed for years due to fire damage. That's what they told the public. Unsafe. Charlie now suspected otherwise. He waited until nightfall. With a lantern in one hand and the key in the other, he slipped into the corridor beyond the rusted no-entry sign. The air turned colder, thick with charred wood and dust. The long hallways moaned with the wind. His boots echoed against the stone, muted only by mold and decay. Room after room passed in shadow until he reached it, a crooked shelf lined with old theological books. But unlike the others, this one had scuff marks on the floor as though it had been moved. Charlie knelt, running his fingers along the base. A faint indentation, a keyhole. The key fit perfectly. Click. With a strained creak, the shelf swung inward, revealing a narrow passage. He raised the lantern and stepped inside. The passage led to a small room. No windows. Walls lined with parchment and faded drawings. A single writing desk. And there, atop it, a journal wrapped in black silk and tied with twine. He approached. The moment his fingers touched the journal, a gust of cold air blew through the room as if the abbey itself exhaled. He opened it. It was Eloane's handwriting. Chapter 7. Eloane's journal, the hidden pages. They tell me the fire was an accident. That no one died. But I remember the screams. They tell me I imagined the letters. That no one outside wrote to me. But I remember the ink under my nails, the seal warm in my palm before dawn. They tell me I am healing. But they do not see what I see. The eye watches. I don't know what it is, not man, not ghost, but it dwells between knowledge and madness. It finds those who uncover too much. When I tried to publish my real story, the one about the Abbey's past, its hidden experiments, they stopped me. Told me the ink was dangerous. Told me some truths belong only to the grave. They burned the West Wing to erase what they had done. But I saved the final pieces. I hid them where even the eye would not look, in fiction, in the letters I sent you, Charlie. I cloaked the truth in love so they would not tear it apart. I never left. Not in body. But in words I ran to you. And if you found this, you must finish it. Charlie closed the journal, heart pounding. Experiments? The eye? What did she mean? Then he saw the parchment pinned to the wall behind the desk. A map, rough but detailed. It marked the Abbey's original layout. And beneath the West Wing, a sublevel. A sealed chamber. Not fire damaged. Buried. Suddenly the lantern flickered. He turned. Footsteps. From the corridor behind. He grabbed the journal and backed into the passage, blowing out the light to cloak himself in darkness. The footsteps grew louder, measured, slow. Then a whisper, "You shouldn't be here, Mr. Atherton." Charlie held his breath. The figure stepped into the doorway. A man in a black coat. Not Reverend Vale. "Who are you?" Charlie demanded, his voice hoarse. The man tilted his head. "The question, Mr. Atherton, is not who I am, but why Eloane was allowed to write to you at all." Charlie took a step back. "She sent the letters herself." The man smiled, a cold thing. "Did she? Or did we let them pass to see what you'd do?" A ringing began in Charlie's ears. The man continued. "We never feared the ink. We feared the reader. You were more dangerous than she was." "Why?" Charlie asked. "What's below the Abbey? What were you doing to her?" The man exhaled. "She was a mirror. We used her to reflect the truth, then burned the reflection. You, Mr. Atherton, are a flame. You spread it. He reached into his coat. Charlie turned and ran. Through the passage. Into the corridor. His feet pounded the stone as the man gave chase. Down the hall, up crumbling steps. A side door burst open, and Charlie dove out into the garden. Lungs screaming, journal pressed to his chest. Only when he reached the edge of the forest did he stop. Gasping, heart wild. But he still had the journal. And now he knew. There was something under Morley Abbey. Something people killed to bury. And Eloan had tried to unearth it. She'd used Charlie as her messenger. And now it was his turn to uncover the rest. Charlie didn't sleep that night. He stayed in a rented room at a small inn far from the abbey. The journal locked in a hidden drawer beneath the floorboard. A revolver he'd never used resting on the table beside him. Morning crept over the horizon like a pale flame, but it brought no warmth. Only the cold realization that the weight he carried was now far greater than just Eloan's memory. The journal revealed the unspeakable. Morley Abbey had been used as a testing ground for mind manipulation and memory suppression experiments, commissioned by private scientific guilds, protected by church doctrine, and endorsed by royal bureaucrats. And Eloan's father, Sir Reginald Harrowmere, was at the heart of it all. An aristocrat, a philanthropist, a servant of God, a monster cloaked in civility. Charlie dressed with care. Plain wool coat, tweed cap. He needed to blend in, not draw eyes. He visited a local print shop under the pretense of collecting a short story he was writing, a common ruse he'd used before. The printer, a stout woman with ink-stained fingers, smiled at him and handed over a bundle of fresh pages. Inside were 10 identical copies of Eloan's journal. He'd stayed up all night transcribing it by hand. He paid in coin and walked out with the bundle tied in brown paper. His next stop was calculated. The estate of Milo Everhart, a political journalist with a reputation for teetering on the edge of scandal and surviving. Milo and Charlie had met once before at a lecture on public censorship. Milo had complimented Charlie's foolish idealism. Charlie knocked. A servant answered. He waited only minutes before Milo himself appeared at the door, tall and lean, always with that casual cynicism around his eyes. Well, if it isn't the Bleeding Heart. Milo leaned against the frame. Come to write me a love letter? I've got something better, Charlie said grimly. And I need your help. Milo read in silence for almost an hour. The fireplace crackled. Charlie sat across from him, jaw clenched, fingers tightening around his cup of untouched tea. When Milo finally looked up, he said, "You do realize this would explode half the ministries?" Charlie nodded. That's the idea. And Eloan Harrowmere? Her name will be dragged through fire. So will yours. She's already in the fire, Charlie said softly. She tried to warn the world. They made her disappear. Milo tapped the journal. This isn't just a scandal, Charlie. This is treason. If this reaches the wrong hands, you'll vanish too. Then I need to reach the right hands first. Chapter 8. That night, the first of the copies was delivered to Lady Marianne Whitlock, a reformist in Parliament known for her underground ties to orphanages and rehabilitation homes. Charlie didn't knock or wait. He slipped the package under the iron gate and vanished into the fog. The second went to Editor Palmer of the Westminster Sentinel with no return address. The third to Dr. Adrian Lark, a scientist exiled years ago for refusing to participate in patriotic medical programs. The rest Charlie scattered between trusted corners of London's conscience. Each copy bore no name, only the title. The Violet Letter, a journal of memory and fire. But he was being watched. He noticed the same tall man by the lamplight 3 nights in a row. The same beggar who never moved. The girl at the flower stall who always faced away. They were watching, waiting for him to slip. So Charlie moved like a ghost, slept in a different place every night, wrapped his identity in shadows. Still, whispers began to rise. Someone tried to break into Milo's home. The Sentinel postponed its latest issue due to fire. Dr. Lark wrote a letter of agreement to Charlie, but 2 days later was found drowned in the Thames, ruled a suicide. Charlie felt the walls close in. Then came the letter. It was left on his windowsill, folded into a triangle. No seal. No name. Inside, "You've stirred the eye. You have one chance to leave. Eloan's father is coming home." Charlie crumpled the letter in his fist. Sir Reginald Harrowmere was returning. It meant things were escalating and fast. They were preparing to bury it all again. even if it meant burying Charlie too. That same evening, Charlie went back to the forest edge outside Morley. He watched the Abbey's tower through the trees, cold wind clawing his coat. In the distance, a carriage rolled up the gravel path, its gold crest glinting in the moonlight. Sir Reginald stepped out, older, colder, expression blank as marble. And behind him, Eloan, alive, but wrong. Her hair was longer, her posture stiff, her face a mask. Her eyes met Charlie's through the darkness, but there was no recognition. None. She turned and walked with her father into the Abbey. Charlie stepped back, heart stopped. They hadn't killed her. They had wiped her clean. Eloan was alive. Charlie had imagined that moment countless times. Her voice calling his name again. Her hand reaching out to his. The sorrow melting into joy. But none of those visions prepared him for the cold finality he saw in her eyes. That distant gaze. The stranger behind the familiar face. He had watched her step inside the Abbey beside Sir Reginald, not a flicker of rebellion in her stride. Just obedience, practiced and polished. A machine in a girl's body. It unmoored something inside Charlie. His heart, once propelled by grief and a hunger for justice, now floundered in murky waters. If she was alive, if she had been all this time, then why the silence? Why the letters? Why the dreams? Why didn't she remember him? That night, he didn't return to any of his safe houses. Instead, he wandered through the fog-drenched woods around Morley Abbey, barely feeling the brambles that tore his coat or the bitter wind clawing at his face. Thoughts darted in his mind like wild birds. Could memory truly be stolen? Could it be planted like seeds, rewritten like novels? He had read theories of such things in Eloan's journal, of serums that deaden thought, of electricity used not to heal but to erase, of behavioral conditioning passed off as redemption. But theories were words on parchment. Eloan's hollow gaze was truth. He couldn't leave her like that. Chapter 9. The Abbey had doubled its guard. Tall, silent figures in black cloaks patrolled the grounds, their presence like statues with eyes. They bore no sigils, no official symbols of church or crown, yet they moved with authority. Charlie observed from the trees, calculating. He couldn't waltz through the front gate, nor could he approach her in public. But the west wing, her old room, if they hadn't moved her, still had a window that faced the forest. Late at night, with mist curling around the foundations like smoke, Charlie crept close. The window was there, unlit but ajar slightly to let in the night air. His hands trembled as he pulled out the note he had written. It was short, personal, honest. Eloan, I saw you. You don't remember me, but I remember everything. You once told me the mind could be a cage, and I didn't believe you. Now I do. You're alive, and I will not leave you behind. If you read this and feel even a flicker of something, meet me by the birch grove. You once said it reminded you of snow. Charlie. He slipped it gently onto the windowsill, anchoring it with a tiny pressed violet, a flower she'd once adored. Then he backed away into the thicket and hid himself in a hollow beneath an old yew tree. He stayed there, breath shallow, eyes fixed on the dark glass. He waited for hours. No one came to the window. The next day, Charlie traveled to Lady Marianne Whitlock's estate, his mind still reeling but his purpose sharpening. The violet letter copies had made waves, but now it was time for war. He wrote with urgency, fingers stained with ink. Lady Whitlock, the girl in the journal is alive. She has been modified, manipulated. Her father returned her to the Abbey. Whatever hold they had on her mind, they now wield it to show their power. They will not let her go, and they will not let me live. You told me once that revolutions begin not with gunpowder but with truth. Well, here it is. If we do not act now, we lose the spark forever. I will be near the Abbey. I do not expect to return. But maybe she can. C.A. He sealed it and gave it to a courier with a warning, deliver it directly to her hand. No stops. No intermediaries. Then he returned to the woods, this time not to hide, but to prepare. The uprising began not with a bang, but with a whisper. One of Lady Whitlock's allies, a parliament clerk with access to restricted records, released documents confirming the existence of Project Penumbra, a covert program exploring memory manipulation, sanctioned under emergency laws during a past plague outbreak. The documents named Sir Reginald Harrowmere as a founding member. Protests erupted in East London. Printers ran pamphlets into the night, bearing Eloan's drawings and quotes from her journal. Students marched. Medical scholars demanded an inquiry. The eye, once unseen, blinked. And Charlie became their most wanted man. Guards were posted across stations. Flyers with his face painted him as a dangerous radical. Whispers said he'd murdered a noble girl, others that he was part of an occultist cult. He laughed bitterly at the irony. The truth always bore the ugliest mask. Back in the woods, he watched the Abbey again. Still no sign from Eloan. Still no note returned. He was beginning to believe it was over, that whatever they'd done to her had obliterated the girl he knew. Until one night, 3 days after slipping the note, he saw movement. Her window. The curtain pulled slightly, then opened. A pale hand reached out. The violet was gone. Charlie's heart pounded. He didn't know what it meant. Was it a signal? A warning? He stepped out from the tree line, just one step, and she looked down. Her eyes locked on his. Still blank, but her lips parted just slightly. Then closed. She vanished. But she had looked. She had seen him. And that was enough. It meant there was still something in there. A fragment. A heartbeat. He wouldn't run. He wouldn't leave. But he knew. They were coming for him. And next time they wouldn't miss. Chapter 10. Eloan was at her bedside. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She didn't even blink as she stared out into the dark, her nightgown pale and shapeless in the moonlight, her hands resting gently on the bedside table. The note had been in her hand. The way her fingers curled around the edge of the parchment like one might handle a dead bird, gently with uncertain reverence. Now she just stood there, unmoving. A statue carved from silence. Charlie, waiting and watching from the yew tree's hollow, felt his breath shallow. His body screamed for movement, for action, for something, but he sat like stone. Every rustle of the wind in the leaves was a cannon in his ears. Every flicker of movement made his heart thunder. Charlie slumped against the tree, caught between agony and hope. Was she thinking? Remembering? Or had they hollowed her out so deeply there was nothing left to reach? He didn't know. But something the way she didn't call for the guards kept him tethered to faith. If she had read it, something must have stirred. Even the most broken songbird remembers how to sing, eventually. Across the kingdom, the storm gathered. In the southern boroughs of London, a fire had erupted at the Gilmore Archives, rumored to house early medical experimentation records. Witnesses claimed the flames danced too neatly to be an accident. In Bristol, 4 members of a secretive alchemical society were found dead, their journals missing. The coroner blamed an explosion in a lab. In York, the eye had begun moving openly, dark-cloaked men escorting city officials away without explanation. One by one, doctors, scribes, and dissenting voices vanished from their homes under the veil of night. But others had been ready. Lady Marianne Whitlock, already a legend in quiet corridors of power, had anticipated this. Using her web of former court allies and rogue journalists, she funneled survivors of the Eye's purge into hidden networks. Among them, the last living nurse from the Penumbra Project, a priest who had heard Eloan's confession years before, and a boy who once ran errands through the Abbey and spoke of screams behind locked doors. The truth was no longer contained. The streets of the capital turned uneasy as pamphlets soaked in red ink appeared overnight on brick walls and tavern counters. The girl they killed leaves still. Her mind chained. Her words stolen. How many more are silenced? More and more citizens, scholars, students, the working poor, began to question the aristocracy's clean smiles. And when one of the Queen's own advisors was implicated by name in a released document, the monarchy had no choice but to respond. But response, in the old world, meant control. Curfews were set, paper vendors arrested, mail censored, and the Eye's hand, hidden for decades, clenched tighter than ever before. Chapter 11. Charlie spent 3 more nights near the Abbey. Each night colder. Each night quieter. No more movement from Eloan. He left a second note, briefer this time. Just a line from a poem they had once shared. When I forget myself, will you find me again? Still, no sign. Then came the whistle. A low, shrill bird call, 2 rising tones, 1 falling. Charlie recognized it instantly. He turned, and from behind the trees, a figure emerged, Tobias Gray, one of Lady Whitlock's messengers. A former spy turned ghost who now moved like shadow through cities and forests alike. Tobias, Charlie whispered. What happened? Tobias looked grave. They're closing in. You're their priority now. They think if they catch you, the rebellion falls. It won't, Charlie replied. There's too much fire now. It's everywhere. Yes, Tobias said. But some fires die if they lose their spark. Charlie's jaw clenched. Is Eloan safe? For now, Tobias said. But Whitlock wants you out. She says if you fall now, we lose more than just you, we lose the next move. I won't leave, Charlie said. Not until she's free. Tobias studied him for a long time. then handed him a small, rolled scroll. Then make it count. We've secured an inside source at the Abbey. A sympathetic maid. She left this in the birch grove. Charlie unrolled the scroll. It wasn't a note. It was a sketch. A self-portrait. Crude. Done in charcoal. A girl's face, Eloan's, but not the blank one he had seen. This face was haunted. Conflicted. Eyes wide with confusion, pain, and something else. And on the back, a single word. Remembering. Charlie's heart twisted. He closed the scroll slowly and looked to the Abbey. The eye would come for him soon. But the girl inside was still fighting. So he would stay. If this was to be a war, he would not run from its front line. Even if it ended with his name scratched out like the others. Charlie had spent 4 nights burrowed in the earth like a hunted fox. His breath steamed in the air each dawn. His eyes raw from watching windows that blinked with ghostly candlelight. Every rustle of leaf or distant step made his hand twitch toward the knife he kept strapped to his thigh. Not for offense, but for the one last defense should his mind beg for silence. But then, in the blue hush before dawn on the 5th day, it happened. A stone rolled near his hiding place, deliberately. He tensed. A soft whisper followed. Behind the ivy wall. No one for 15 minutes. It was the sympathetic maid, the same one who had delivered Eloan's self-portrait. Tobias had said she could be trusted, and now her soft voice cracked the icy monotony like a church bell in snow. Charlie didn't hesitate. He slipped from the yew grove, through the orchard, and crept beneath the overgrown hedgerows that wrapped around the Abbey's back garden. The ivy wall was part of a crumbling greenhouse long since abandoned, and through the broken panes he saw her. Eloan. She was alone, seated on a worn stone bench, her hair loose down her back. A breeze stirred the strands like silken thread caught in water. Charlie stepped into view slowly. She turned slowly, mechanically, as if expecting someone else. But then their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, nothing moved. Eloan, he breathed. Her lips parted. No sound came. He moved closer. Carefully. Slowly. As if she might vanish at a touch. It's me, he said. Charlie. I know, she said, her voice soft, cautious. I remember. The words should have broken him with joy. But they didn't. Because her eyes, those mismatched eyes once so quick with laughter, were hollowed and dim. Her voice carried no life. Like she was still reading from someone else's script. They told me you were dead, Charlie said. Someone saw them bury a body. They saw your father weep. That wasn't me, she replied, blinking slowly. They took me to the mountain house. There were others there. Girls with strange eyes. Some never woke up again. Why, he asked. Why do this to you? To any of them? She looked down at her hands. Because we were born wrong. Mismatched and violet eyes. Unpredictable traits. That's what they said. My father agreed. Charlie felt a sickness rise in him. The eye. The experiments. All sanctioned, all hidden beneath layers of aristocracy, medical study, and old money. Eloan continued, her voice dropping lower. They called it the Penumbra Project. Said we were unstable. That our lineage bore signs of hysteria and clairvoyant illness. They wanted to remove the flaws. Make us pliable. Charlie reached for her hand. I came for you. I never stopped. She looked at him, her lips trembling. A flicker passed through her face, pain, memory, something almost like recognition. But before she could speak, you there. A shout tore the air. Charlie turned. A guard, high in the garden's upper terrace, pointed down. Damn it. He gripped her hand, urgent. I have to go. They'll kill me if I stay. Eloan clutched his sleeve. Don't, please it. But the echoing clang of boots on stone silenced them. Charlie pulled away. Don't forget. Not this time. He turned and ran through the garden into the hedgerow down the orchard path. But they were ready. The trap had been laid. 2 guards came from the eastern wing. One dropped from the tree above, he hadn't seen him. Another sprinted from the stone wall near the creek. They'd known he was there. Tobias was right. They expected him to stay. Charlie fought, but it was brief. A baton cracked against his side. He went down hard. The last thing he saw was the sky twisting above him and Eloan's figure, framed in the shattered glass, screaming a soundless cry as the guards dragged him away. The truth did not die with his capture. Word had already spread. Lady Marianne Whitlock received his last letter. And with it, the full ledger that Tobias and his allies had obtained from the Harrowmere estate, a document signed by nobles, physicians, and even a minister of the crown. It contained dates, names, procedures. Locations. Children. The project was no longer rumor. It was a documented horror. When the first printing press in Manchester rolled out the report, it sold out within the hour. By dusk, 20 towns across England were boiling with protest. Street speakers took to the platforms. Artists painted murals of girls with mismatched and violet eyes and sealed mouths. University students in Cambridge staged sit-ins. And in the heart of London, a mob stood before the royal gates chanting a single word. Why? The I doubled their efforts, detaining, silencing, burning letters, and imprisoning editors. But the fire was too wide, too fierce, too bright. And from her window in the Abbey, Eloan stood once more. She touched the glass. And this time, when the maid brought her paper and charcoal, she didn't draw a self-portrait. She drew Charlie, bleeding, laughing, alive. Chapter 12. Charlie Atherton had always imagined imprisonment as something cold and dark, stone walls, rusted chains, the scrape of rats along forgotten corners. But the room they dragged him into was nothing like that. It was clean, too clean, lit by a single gas lantern suspended from an iron hook in the ceiling. The air smelled of vinegar and lavender, an attempt to erase the stink of desperation that lingered in every interrogation chamber across the kingdom. His wrists were bound behind him. Blood soaked through the fabric of his shirt from where they'd struck him earlier, a wet warmth he could no longer feel. His lip was split, one eye swollen. The guard who had struck him the hardest now stood silently at the far end of the room, unmoving, arms behind his back like a sentinel of stone. And before Charlie sat a man in an ink-black coat, immaculately tailored, a brass pin of the royal seal at his lapel. Charles Henry Atherton, the man began, unrolling a scroll of parchment. His voice was crisp, clipped, every syllable honed like the edge of a scalpel. Born 17th of May, 1846. Son of Edward and Marybelle Atherton. Resident of Kent. Educated at Belmere University. Apprenticed to Rupert and Sons engineering firm until last autumn. Known affiliations? None. But quite the curious collection of letters in your satchel. He held up Charlie's bag, the one he'd guarded with his life. Inside had been maps, names, sketches of the Harrowmere estate and Morley Abbey, a near-complete account of the experiments, and a letter addressed to Lady Whitlock detailing the plan to free Eloan. You were thorough, the man added, flipping through the papers. But not careful. Charlie said nothing. I'll ask you once, the man continued. Where did you obtain these documents? Charlie stared back, silent. The man sighed. We can do this gently. Or not. He gestured to the silent guard behind him, who stepped forward without hesitation and slammed Charlie's chair backward onto the stone floor. The impact knocked the breath from his lungs. When they righted him, the blood in his mouth tasted like rust and violets. Hours passed. They asked about Tobias. About the printing press. About Lady Whitlock and whether she had connections with dissidents in Parliament. They asked for names over and over. But Charlie gave them nothing. He spoke once and only once, with venom on his tongue. You buried girls like they were mistakes, he whispered. You silenced minds brighter than yours. Do you think history will favor you? The interrogator leaned forward, his smile bone-thin. No, he replied. History favors survivors. The torture never looked like torture. It was clean. Surgical. Light deprivation. Sleep removal. Water rationing until Charlie could barely swallow. The same questions whispered again and again while his mind blurred time and memory. On the third day, they brought him something new. A note. From Eloan. 2 sentences written in her elegant script. They're using me to bait others. Do not give them more. I will find my way back to the truth. The paper trembled in Charlie's hand. The guard saw his expression. She still cares for you? Charlie looked up with bloodshot eyes. No, he said hoarsely. She remembers me. Outside, the fire burned brighter. Tobias had evaded capture and spread word across the countryside. With each new pamphlet released, another noble estate was forced to answer uncomfortable questions. Households were searched. Personal journals confiscated. Some aristocrats denied all knowledge. Others fled. Lady Whitlock, once thought a cold-eyed relic of politics, emerged as a quiet force, hosting salons where former allies whispered names and wove new allegiances. The capital seethed. Students marched in white masks painted with violet streaks. Mothers of missing daughters held candlelit vigils. Even merchants and bankers, once safe in their golden towers, felt the rumble beneath the cobblestone. This was not just rebellion. It was reckoning. Back in the cell, Charlie finally broke. Not in spirit, but in body. They left him in a pitch-black room for 2 full days, fed only water that tasted faintly of chalk. He hallucinated rain, his father's voice, Eloan's hand. And yet, when the door opened again and the interrogator returned, this time with 4 guards, Charlie smiled through cracked lips. "Finished?" he asked. "Or still hoping I'll name ghosts?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he placed a single white envelope on the table. No seal. Just Charlie's name written in red ink. The interrogator stood. "Your execution is scheduled for 2 days hence." But that letter came from very high above. Someone has taken interest. Charlie's heart stopped. When they left him alone, he opened the envelope. It contained only one line. "You are not alone. Watch for the candle in the 3rd window." He closed his eyes. Eloan. Somewhere beneath the stone, beneath the chambered halls of their enemy, a truth pulsed louder than drums. The uprising was no longer a flicker. It had become a storm. And in 2 nights, Charlie would face the gallows. Unless the storm broke first. Chapter 13. The gallows were built overnight. Crude wood, fresh nails, and fraying ropes hung like question marks above the square. They had not expected such a crowd. Certainly not the thousands that poured into the capital by dawn. Faces grim and eyes burning with a fire no decree could extinguish. Charlie Atherton, bound at the wrists, was marched through the city with 4 guards ahead and 4 behind. His clothes hung loose on his gaunt frame, torn from weeks of captivity. His face was bruised, but his chin was lifted. And his name rose like thunder from the people. "Free Charlie! Free Atherton! Free them all!" The shouts echoed between buildings, carried on banners and fists raised high. People packed into every inch of the square. Students with violets painted on their cheeks, mothers holding signs that read, "Where are our daughters?" Even members of the merchant class who now understood that silence had bought them nothing. From a window high above, Eloan watched. She stood behind the glass of her father's estate, the 3rd window glowing faintly with the candle she had placed the night before, her silent signal that she had not forgotten. Her hand pressed to the cold pane as she whispered, "Don't let them take you." The crown for once did not look away. Queen Adeline, long thought a mere ceremonial monarch under the power of Parliament, had spent the last month watching the city unravel. Reports from the crown's own spies were laid before her in trembling hands, documents that revealed the extent of Project Penumbra, the illegal experimentation of individuals declared defective, and the manipulation of the eye to silence dissent. She had been told it was for the good of the realm, that it was small, necessary, but the names were too many, and the screams outside her palace walls were undeniable. She summoned her council, and for the first time in decades, the crown overruled the eye. In the square, the executioner adjusted the rope. Charlie was marched up the wooden steps, each creak beneath his boots a slow reminder that this could be the end. The crowd grew louder. "Tell the truth. No more lies. Let him speak." He looked up once and saw her. Eloan. Not in silk or shadows, but in the crowd, her hair tucked beneath a gray hood, her heterochromatic eyes locked onto his. A ghost no longer. A witness. Then, horns blared. Steel clattered. And a voice roared through the square. "By order of Her Majesty the Queen, this execution is halted." The guards at Charlie's side froze. One dropped his blade. Gasps erupted as cavalry rode into the square, their cloaks bearing the royal crest. Behind them came the Queen's own investigators, armed with sealed orders and scrolls thicker than law books. "The eye is hereby disbanded. The Abbey shall release all prisoners. And those complicit in Project Penumbra are to be taken alive and tried for crimes against the crown and her people." Chaos turned to shock. Then cheers. Deafening, cathartic cheers that drowned the war drums in every heart. Charlie fell to his knees, breathless, as a royal physician approached and cut his bindings. Elsewhere, arrests began. Eloan's father, Sir Reginald Harrowmere, was taken from his manor under heavy guard. His hands shook not with fear, but fury, his legacy crumbling beneath him. Several ministers were found fleeing toward the northern coast. Others tried to hide behind their wealth and titles, but it was no use. The truth had split the nation open. In the lower levels of the Abbey, doors were unlocked for the first time in years. Girls and boys, long thought dead, stumbled into daylight with soot-streaked skin and haunted eyes. Some barely remembered their names. And among them, the girl with violets in her braid, the one Eloan had always called sister. That night, the sky burned with torchlight as vigils replaced protests. Back in Kent, Eloan found Charlie in a quiet corner of the garden beneath the cherry trees they once passed on spring mornings. He was sitting, breathing as though each second were a borrowed moment. "I thought you were gone," he said, not turning. "I was," she replied softly. "They tried to unmake me." He looked at her, eyes wet but steady. "They failed." Eloan knelt beside him, placing a folded piece of parchment in his hand. On it, the names of every person involved. The last remaining ledgers of the project. "What now?" he whispered. She looked to the city, fires still burning in places, but stars above them all. "Now," she said, "we rebuild what they tried to erase." The old courthouse in the heart of the capital had never seen so many gathered within its walls. The trials of the century, what the papers now called the Abbey Reckoning, drew nobles, commoners, foreign dignitaries, and former victims alike. The vaulted ceilings echoed with testimonies, and the tapestries of justice now hung beside torn banners found in the ruins of the Eye's headquarters. Presiding over it all was the newly reinstated Lord Chancellor Rowan Everhart, a man who had resigned in protest years ago when he suspected corruption but was silenced. Now older and steel-eyed, he returned not to seek revenge but to restore balance. Eloan Harrowmere was the first to take the stand. In the grand chamber, she walked with steady steps, no longer hidden in shadows or lace, but in a plain navy gown, her mismatched eyes proud and unflinching. She recounted everything, her false death, the drugs they gave her to manipulate her memories, the experiments in the Abbey's lower halls, and the way her own father turned her into a symbol for the crown's illusion of purity. The room fell silent as she named names. Sir Reginald Harrowmere, Minister Gideon Vell, Sir Harlan Blackmore, Matron Ysilda of the Abbey. One by one, those who orchestrated and enabled Project Penumbra were brought forth. Some trembled. Others denied until the evidence, ledgers, letters, the personal testimonies of the freed made denial laughable. Public defenders stood behind the accused, but the courtroom's walls felt heavy with the sheer weight of truth. Charlie Atherton sat beside Lady Marianne Whitlock, who now served as the Crown's civilian liaison. Once a noblewoman of whispered rebellion, she had become one of the voices of the people, eloquent, fearless, and wise. She gently touched Charlie's arm as the crowd roared after Eloan's speech. "They tried to erase us," Charlie whispered. "But now we write the ending," Marian said. The sentences came swift and without ceremony. Sir Reginald Harrowmere, stripped of his title, was sentenced to life in the lowest prison beneath Eldgate. His expression betrayed nothing, only a man whose pride had been murdered long before justice arrived. Others faced decades of imprisonment, some banishment. Matron Ysilda, the one who gave children to the Eye, wept when the freed girls stood before her and named her their tormentor. The Eye itself was officially abolished, every branch dismantled, its remaining soldiers either exiled or brought under scrutiny. Its symbols were removed from walls, burned in public bonfires, and replaced by a new emblem, a violet crossing a sun. In the weeks that followed, the capital became something else. Not quite a utopia, but a nation beginning anew. Former victims of the Abbey and the Eye were given land, homes, and a stipend to rebuild their lives. Healing circles were formed in nearly every parish. Queen Adeline personally visited the ruins of the Abbey, where she knelt and placed a wreath of violets in the soil. One night, as a crimson sunset bled across the sky, bells rang from every steeple in the country. Not for war, not for mourning, but for celebration. Epilogue. The ceremony was held in the gardens where they first kissed as foolish, curious youths, now grown, scarred, and reborn. Eloan wore a gown of deep violet, her braid crowned in white flowers. Charlie wore a navy coat lined with silver, bearing no crest of family or title, only a single violet pinned to his chest. People flooded the courtyard. Thousands. Bells rang, children tossed petals, and musicians played songs once banned by the Eye. Marianne Whitlock led the vows, her voice steady. You stood when others fled. You loved when it was dangerous. You spoke when silence was safest. And today you choose each other freely, without fear, without chains, without lies. As Charlie and Eloan kissed, the crowd erupted into thunderous applause, tears flowing freely. A banner stretched across the square read, "The violet letter has been opened." In the years to come, books were written. A new education law passed, ensuring no child would be hidden for having a mind or heart and features that were different. The once feared lower halls of the Abbey were turned into a museum of remembrance. Each year, on the day of the uprising, the people celebrated Violet Day with lanterns and music. Eloin became a leader of the Restoration Commission, working tirelessly to reunite separated families and trace the full extent of the Ice Reach. Charlie became a writer, his memoir, Ashes and Violets, becoming one of the most beloved in the kingdom. But sometimes when the moon was high, the two would steal away to the old river bridge just outside the capital. No guards. No titles. Just them. I still remember, Charlie once said, fingers entwined with hers, the letter you never got to send. She smiled, eyes glinting silver and sea blue. You lived it for me. And under the stars, with the world finally at peace, they danced in silence. Two souls who defied the darkness and chose love over fear. The end. If you like the story, click like and subscribe. Thank you. Till next time.